Today, I will be discussing a skill that a surprisingly large amount of Magic players do not have. And that is the skill of deck building. In today's world, the skill of deck building is becoming less important. It's very simple to hop onto a site such as EtherHub and just import the latest trending deck and have fun with it. You are guaranteed to be playing a high-quality deck, and you don't have through the painful playtesting that could involve a lot of losing. However, the pride I feel whenever my own Brew deck manages to have a decent win rate is intoxicating, and I want all of you to experience this feeling. Plus, Magic will be a better game if there is a wider variety of decks out there. So without further ado, let's get into deck building. The deck currently shown on screen is the deck I am currently playing with in top 1000 in Mythic Standard Best of 3. I just want to highlight a few things about this deck before I begin. The first thing is that brewing your own deck does not mean excluding all the super popular cards from your deck. If you look at my deck, it has Fable of the Mirror Breaker and a Braid. It also used to have Wedding Announcement in previous versions of the deck. The point here is it is okay to include the super popular cards in your deck. Some of you may think this is obvious, but I know a few people, including myself, who used to think brewing your own deck meant taking a completely different route, but I'm here to tell you this is not the case. The second thing is that this deck doesn't have super powerful combos in it. Rather, it is just a collection of good cards that work somewhat well together. Once again, I used to think that in order to brew your own successful deck, you would have to find the greatest combo out there that everyone has missed. But once again, this assumption turned out to be false. The first thing I'm going to do is explain to you how I like to build my decks, and then I'll go over all the meta decks and explain how they follow these rules. There are also a few things I like to do differently from the meta decks, and I'll explain why I do it differently when they come up. Now let's get into it. Before I do anything else, when it comes to deck building, I first identify my win condition. Some win conditions can be straightforward, while others are a lot more complex. For example, in the deck I showed you before, the win conditions were pretty obvious, with Tyrant of Kerr Ridges and Archangel of Wrath being the two win conditions. Another example of a straightforward win con is Sheoldred and Raphine in the Espo decks. A less obvious example is the current Grixis Invoke decks. The win con really is Invoke Despair, however, you do need creatures such as Bloodtithe Harvester and Corpse Appraiser on the field to deal damage and win. In order to brew your own deck, you really need to know what your win con is. If you don't know what card you want to use as a win con, what I do is go onto MTG Arena, set the search filters to Rare and Mythic Rare, as well as Collected and Not Collected. I then scroll through and look at all the different cards that I can build a deck around. What you're looking for is either just straight up powerful cards or cards with the ability to combo. An example of a card that is great to combo with is Mindlink Mech, and an example of just a straight up powerful card is AO, the Dawn Sky. Now that we have our win cons, the next thing we need is card engines. Card engines I define as anything that puts cards in your hand from your library or your graveyard. If you take a close look at any deck, they will have card engines. Generally, you want around 3 different card engines in your deck. 2 and 4 is also fine, but 5 is too much and 1 is too little. If we take a look at my previous deck once again, there are 3 card engines: Fable, Bank Buster and Sorin. In the Rakdos Anvil decks, cards such as Mishra's Research Deck and Experimental Synthesizer are used as card engines. Card engines are super important, however, there is no point drawing heaps of cards, but then not having any mana available to cast them as you've spent all of it drawing cards. This is why Planeswalkers are ideal card engines, as some of them can draw cards every turn without having to spend mana to draw cards. Another thing to point out is that I prefer card engines that have multiple purposes, and reckon a Bank Buster and Fable of the Mirror Breaker are both examples of card engines that have multiple purposes. By the way, I recently made a video on a tactic that I use when playing with Bank Buster, so if you're interested, the link is in the description below. I also tend to stay away from instant and sorcery card draws, as they generally only have one purpose. However, if you do include them, make sure you can cast it at instant speed, as you don't want to be casting something that doesn't impact the board at all at sorcery speed. Now on to removal, which is something that I do quite differently from the meta decks. Every deck needs removal of some sort, it's a must. However, the amount of removal in decks differ vastly, some with only 4 copies of one removal spell while others are stacked to the brim full of removal. Personally, the way I like to play Magic means I always include heaps of removal. If you examine my current deck, you'll see lots of different removal spells. Cut Down, Legions to Ashes, Go for the Throat and Abrade are all removal spells in my main deck. I also have the Wandering Emperor and Destroy Evil in my sideboard. That doesn't even include Archangel of Wrath, Tyrant of Kerr Ridges and in my sideboard Bloodtithe Harvester, which can all be used as removal. The amount of removal you include in your deck varies depending on what type of deck you are trying to build and your playstyle. An easy way I like to decide how much removal goes into your deck is to ask yourself if your threat's more threatening than your opponent's threats. If not, then I suggest you include more removal. Something that many people don't think about when building a deck is their own playstyle. For me, I tend to play a more controlled playstyle, no matter what type of deck I'm playing. Because I know this, I include more removal as that is the way I'm inclined to play my mid-range deck. For someone who likes to play more aggressive, you might want to include less removal and include more threats yourself. Now it's time for perhaps the hardest part of deck building, meta changing. Meta changing is the process in which you alter your deck based on the current meta. This part of deck building is the hardest part by far. Sometimes you get to this stage and you realize your deck is just a pile of garbage, and other times you get to this stage and you are amazed at just how good your deck is. There is really only one way to do this, which is playtesting. However, there is a specific process you must follow when playtesting that I will explain to you right now. The first step is to ask yourself, when I lose, how do I lose? Common examples is that you are constantly missing your fourth land drop, causing you to lose because you get behind on tempo. If this is the case, then maybe consider either adding more lands to your deck, or perhaps including cards that can find lands for you. Another card you might constantly lose to is Sheoldred, or AO the Dawn Sky, or even Wedding Announcement. The next question you have to ask, is your deck the problem or is your playstyle the problem? I cannot stress the importance of this step enough. To really understand how important this is, I'll give you an example. You might be constantly losing to Sheoldred, which is one of those cards in which you will lose to if he stays on the battlefield. However, since he has no protection or no enter the battlefield effect, he can easily be dealt with by creature removal of any sort and he will hardly impact the game. The problem could be your deck, maybe you're not running enough creature removal. However, most commonly, the problem is actually you. In this case study, instead of saving your removal for Sheoldred, you might be casting it on a Corpse Appraiser instead. Sure, it's not ideal that your opponent has a 3/3 on the board, but you would rather remove Sheoldred instead. Now on to the third step, which is asking yourself, how do I win? This is something that I have struggled with in the past, as some of my decks just can't win unless I completely take control of the board and utterly dominate. The best decks you will find can just pull through and win, even when they are behind on board state. While this is correlated with your win con, it is your supporting cards which are the problem the most of the time. For decks that have a combo win con, if you're not winning enough because your combo isn't going off enough, you need to either include cards that increase the chances of the combo going off or make the supporting cards better so you can win without the combo. Depending on the deck and how powerful the combo is, you could take either approach. For decks which aren't combo decks, the way you increase the chances of winning is to increase your damage potential. The majority of the time, the best way to do this is to increase the percentage of creatures in your deck. As much as having a deck stacked full of removal and counter spells is great, if you don't have enough damage potential, the only way you can win is by utterly controlling the game and then cast your 1 or 2 win cons. This enables your deck to win more often. The fourth step is to ask yourself, is this deck balanced? While utterly destroying certain strategies is great, you want to perform well against any type of deck. To do this, you need your supporting cards to fill any weaknesses you may have. For example, if you don't do enough damage, you may want to include more creatures in your deck. If you struggle to draw enough cards, then maybe include more card engines. The whole point is, when you get into a match and draw your opening hand, as long as you have enough lands, you want that hand to be very competitive, because if you can get that, then your deck will be on the road to success. To summarize, if you follow these steps, then your deck will be on the road to success. While I glossed over most of the details, the fundamentals are all there. If you want more of a detailed breakdown of certain steps in the video, comment down below and let me know which ones you want me to go over. Thanks for watching and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.